winning fantasy leagues, it's all about finding the best picks in each round of your draft. Whether that means zigging one over Zag, whether that means taking a chance on a player who's injured, or we haven't quite seen that ceiling yet. But one thing's for sure, these are 15 players in each round of the draft that I think can absolutely win you leagues this year. Round one, Kupp. The latest reports of Kupp likely to be recovered from a minor hamstring injury well in advance of the start of the season. And I know that kind of stuff can scare people, but with Kupp's ADP dipping towards like the late first round, that provides a huge opportunity to grab one of the most valuable players in football. Last year, the 2022 Rams, they weren't even a shadow of their Super Bowl winning team. They took the field in September and everything went wrong. The offensive line was awful. Matthew Stafford was dealing with injuries. But one thing was a constant, and that was Kupp, who was a fantasy star. Before he got injured himself later on in the season, he was putting up 22.4 PPR points per game, only behind Justin Jefferson's 22.6. And Kupp, he was one of only 3 wide receivers to have a target share of 30% or greater. There just aren't that many wide receivers who can really command that amount of targets per game. The Rams, they spluttered and disappointed week after week, but the same wasn't true for Kupp. I mean, he was averaging 90.2 yards per game, which was the third most, and 10.9 targets per game, which was also the third most. The Rams' defense this year are going to be bad, and it's entirely possible that the offense is coming out and having to pass the ball more often. It's not that spicy to say that Kupp really could be the wide receiver 1 overall this year. Round 2, Tony Pollard. If Zeke Elliott had not been cut, then we would have been wishing and just really hoping for Pollard to be able to repeat his incredible efficiency from last year in order for him to pay off this year. But with Zeke Elliott out of the picture, there's no doubt that Pollard is going to see a massive uptick in volume for 2023. In 2022, Pollard had 12 touchdowns, which is the 4th most for a running back. He also created the highest fantasy points over expected, and he had the 3rd most big runs amongst all running backs. Pollard did all that on 15.0 touches per game. For reference, that was less than Latavius Murray averaged last year. The Cowboys gave a total of 32.1 touches per game to Pollard and Zeke combined. They didn't add Bijan. They didn't bring back anyone. If they do bring back Zeke Elliott, it's going to be in a far more reduced role. He's sat out there on the open market for ages. And the reason is nobody's particularly bothered. They've seen that he doesn't have that much tread on the tires left. And if Zeke Elliott even does come back over the next month before the season starts, you absolutely do not need to feel worried. Pollard has shown that he's an explosive player. He can handle the high-value touches, and he's absolutely going to crush it again in fantasy football this year. Round 3, Lamar Jackson. If we remove the game where Lamar Jackson left because of injury in week 13, when he'd only played 14% of snaps, then his points per game jumped from 20.3 to 21.98, which is a much rosier picture. And I know it doesn't sound like a huge amount, but when you're talking about a 10% increase, those marginal gains really matter at the quarterback position. Now, Lamar Jackson, he's been paid. He enters 2023, one of the highest NFL players ever. And he's got a new play caller in Todd Monken, who's allowing Jackson more freedom at the line of scrimmage, allowing him to adjust the play calling. And he's just going to unlock what we haven't seen from Jackson. Something that Greg Roman really struggled to do was unlock this passing game. The ceiling for Jackson, it's absolutely another MVP campaign like his historic 2019 year where he broke all sorts of fantasy football records. That year he was fronting Mark Andrews, Hollywood Brown. And then after them, it was like Willie Snead, John Brown, and Seth Roberts. Now he's got Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham, Rashod Bateman, Mark Andrews, and Isaiah Likely. The offensive line looks healthy, which is going to be a big help for Lamar. This Ravens offense has some of the highest upside of any offense in the NFL right now. Round 4, Jerry Jeudy. Nobody's pretending that 2022 was a good year for the Broncos, and it's completely fair to suggest that Russell Wilson is in last chance saloon right now. But it's also fair to suggest that this team looks far better set up for success in 2023 with Sean Payton there instead of Nathaniel Hackett. And one of the first things that Sean Payton did was go out and strengthen the offensive line. When you look back at last year, there weren't many silver linings for the Broncos, but the one that shone was Jerry Jeudy, who over weeks 11 to 17 was the half PPR wide receiver 12, scoring 14.2 points per game at an average of 2.7 fantasy points per touch. That was equal with Justin Jefferson during that period. The trouble was the Broncos weren't able to stay on the field as much as a competent offense like the Vikings. The Broncos averaged 31 pass attempts per game compared to 38 for the Vikings. Now, Jeudy should absolutely benefit from better play calling, a calmer Russell Wilson who's able to stay in the pocket for longer. And if Jeudy's even able to just take back efficiency from last year and just run with it at a slightly higher rate of passes, then it really could be a massive season for him this year. Round 5, Justin Herbert. The most important change Chargers made this offseason might have been moving on from offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi and replacing him with Kellen Moore, who moved over from the Cowboys after differences of opinion with Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy. Reportedly, those included that Kellen Moore wanted to pass the ball more often than McCarthy decided. McCarthy, he's a boomer. He wants to run the ball lots and establish the run at times and then take shots. Kellen Moore wanted to be aggressive more and more. And throwing the ball more is music to the ears of fantasy managers who took charges last year. It should absolutely help Justin Herbert bounce back from 2022, where he struggled through a rib injury for much of the season, and that clearly hampered his ability to throw a ball downfield. His average depth of target dropped to a career-low 6.4 yards per attempt, but now he's healthy with a new passing scheme and a healthy Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Quentin Johnston, Austin Eckler, and Gerald Everett. And perhaps most importantly, star left tackle Rashawn Slater will be on the field too. Even last year, to see at the end of the season, when Keenan Allen and Mike Williams were both actually on the field together. They didn't take the field together for a whole game until week 13. At that point, Justin Herbert's ADOT started creeping up. But now we're going to see this absolute plethora of options there. And Justin Herbert could be set for an MVP caliber season as well. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that you should be going out and drafting Justin Herbert as well as Lamar Jackson. But if you miss on Lamar Jackson, coming back 2 rounds later and getting Justin Herbert is absolutely a smash for your fantasy team. Round 6 is Kyle Pitts. We've not really seen the best of him in the NFL. He came into the NFL with so much hype and so much promise. And he had a fantastic rookie season, one of the best rookie tight end seasons any tight ends had in the last couple of decades. But he had a strange season in 2022. He was second in target share amongst tight ends, but he was 47th in catchable ball rate among tight ends with at least 25 targets. That was dead last in that category. And the reason was Marcus Mariota. He looked appalling. Arthur Smith has to prove he isn't going to waste Kyle Pitts' talent much longer. He's got to get Kyle Pitts involved because essentially after this year, Kyle Pitts could be asking for a contract. And if Falcons aren't ready to give him one, then he could be looking to go elsewhere. Out of the top 20 tight ends in 2022 PPR points per game, Kyle Pitts was one of 6 players to score 2.7 points per touch. He also led the position in air yards per game with 81.6, despite only seeing 5.9 targets per game, which ranked 8th. So the ball, when it was going to Pitts, was going downfield a lot. And at tight end, we don't often get those kind of tight ends who are field stretchers. But those plays, they can really unlock a huge ceiling. And that's something that we should always be chasing in fantasy football. Playing safe doesn't win you titles. Playing safe just gets you maybe creeping into the playoffs. I want ceiling outcomes and I want to win fantasy championships. We never got to see Desmond Ridder and Kyle Pitts take the field together in 2022. By the time that Ridder actually got put into the starting lineup, Kyle Pitts was injured and he's still recovering from that MCL injury, but reports suggest that he should be up to speed well before the season starts. If Desmond Ridder can take even a semi-competent leap forward into his second year, then it finally could be wheels up for Kyle Pitts and he could be a true difference maker at the position. Round 7, James Conner. James Conner missed 3 games with an injury midway through the 2022 season, but from week 9 onwards, Conner was a top 5 running back on 4 occasions, and he only finished outside the top 15 on 1 occasion. We know that running backs struggle with injury as they get older, and Conner is 28 years old now, and he has missed time over the previous few seasons. So it's okay to feel those alarm bells ringing slightly. But in redraft or best ball, we can cope with those. We can build around the fact that we expect a player taken in round 8 to not always need to be, round 7, to not always need to be an every week starter. Connor's the only real option in Arizona's running back room. They paid him a lot. They have to just actually accept that they can't move on from him right now, that he needs to be utilized. Behind him, there's only Keontae Ingram and Corey Clement for competition. If you're worried about them, I don't know what to tell you. We've seen Connor be productive with and without Kyler Murray. So whilst Connor goes this late in drafts, it's absolutely time to just saddle back up with him, because the Cardinals, they don't have options. And when Kyler Murray does come back off the ACL injury and the meniscus injury, he's probably not going to be rushing the ball the same amount as he used to. And he could be looking to check down the ball more often. And we know James Conner can be great in the passing game too. Round 8, second Ravens player on this list. And Ravens pass catchers, they're still being priced up as Baltimore pass catchers were in the Greg Roman era, where wide receivers would keep bumping into each other when they run routes. They weren't running a particularly good offense with the pass catchers then. But now, Todd Monken, we know he likes to spread players out. He wants to use the entire field, and he wants to make use of wide receivers in the best way that he can. Bateman's ADP particularly stands out. It's like people are running scared of Bateman, but look at what he's competing with. Odell Beckham, he's the highest paid receiver on the Ravens, but he's much more likely to be used in situational plays and in the red zone. He's 31 years old, coming off 2 ACL injuries. And Zay Flowers, plenty of positive camp buzz about him, but rookies do find it difficult in the NFL at times, and it shouldn't surprise anyone if Flowers finds it tricky when the games start playing. Bateman's career, it's been interrupted by injuries, but he's well on his way back to being healthy now. The plan, if you listen to Baltimore beat writers, was always that he was going to start camp on PUP, and it would be a couple of weeks into camp by the time that he really got rolling. In the words of Lamar Jackson, he's wide receiver 1. When Lamar was asked about Bateman not so long ago, he said, "Oh yeah, Bateman's wide receiver 1." Bateman's ADP has dropped 20 spots in the last month, but if he gets back on the field soon, within the next couple of weeks, expect that to take a rise by at least a round. We saw last year when he was on the field, Lamar used him near the line of scrimmage and deep. And this team does need a deep threat, so don't be surprised if Bateman leads the receivers in average depth of target. Round 9, Samaje Perine. The Bengals lost Samaje Perine after an impressive 2022 campaign where he was more efficient than starting running back Joe Mixon. Perine had 4.2 yards per carry and Mixon's 4.0. And in missed tackles, Perine had 26 missed tackles to Mixon's 33. Did that on 110 fewer attempts, so he also outproduced Mixon in yards per reception with 7.6 to 7.3. The Perine opted to leave the Super Bowl chasing Bengals for an identical contract from the Broncos. That was because Sean Payton personally pitched him his vision of Perine of how he could use both Perine and the injured Javonte Williams in his system. Williams is making positive strides in his recovery from an ACL and LCL and PCL injury suffered in October. And there's reason to believe when healthy that Perine could still be a valuable pick, though, because if Williams struggles to find that explosive level like J.K. Dobbins did last year, then Perine's going to see plenty of work. Perine's going to see plenty of work in the passing game. And if for any reason, say, Javonte Williams needs a second surgery, much like J.K. Dobbins did last year, then it's going to be all aboard Samaje Perine, who we know can be a workhorse running back. Round 10, Damien Harris. There are many positives to James Cook's game, and, there's plenty of deserved hype for him going into his second year. But he's no means a short yardage bruiser like Damien Harris is, or even the type of back that teams are going to rely upon in the red zone. That's something that Damien Harris has shown he can do well over his career. The Bills have consistently talked about not wanting to rush Josh Allen as much as they did in 2023. They believe that, the injuries Josh Allen picked up last year came from rushing the ball, and those injuries ultimately curtailed their season last year. It's unlikely that Josh Allen stops completely rushing, but using a bruiser like Damien Harris in short yardage situations, it makes too much sense. And we're only 1 year removed from Damien Harris scoring 14 rushing touchdowns for the Patriots. Round 11, Devon Achane. Devon Achane lit up the combine with his blazing 4.32 40-yard dash, and he was drafted to the Dolphins in the 3rd round, which was a perfect fit in Mike McDaniel's rushing scheme. He plays the outside zone run scheme. And for a player like Devon Achane who wants to get to the outside, who wants to get away from the maulers at the line of scrimmage, that's perfect. The Dolphins, they target running backs plenty, throwing them at the 12th highest rate of all offenses. And that's an area where Achane can absolutely take advantage. You go back and look at what he did in college, and he was an excellent receiving back, excellent route runner at 4.32 pace. I mean, how many linebackers are keeping up with him? Achane's competing with Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert for playing time, 2 players who've struggled to stay on the field in recent years, picked up plenty of injuries. And it feels like if the Dolphins were going to bring in Dalvin Cook, they likely would have done it by now. Achane might be a better in best ball type player to start his career, but we want players who can make explosive plays. In fantasy football, we don't care about the guys who pick up 3 yards at a time. We want high value touches, whether that's touchdowns, receptions, or just unleashing a 40-yard run when they get an opportunity. It's a high risk, high reward bet on just elite athletic traits. Round 12, Michael Gallup. This time last year, fantasy managers were higher on Michael Gallup coming off an ACL injury than they are this year. He's slipping to the 12th, even to the 13th round at times, several rounds behind Brandon Cooks, whose ADP has anointed him as the wide receiver 2 in this Cowboys offense, without any evidence that that's how they see him. Gallup's recovery from his ACL injury really hampered his playing time last year and his ability when on field. His targets per game dropped to a 5-year low of 5.2. His average depth of target dropped to a career low 11.1. Along with this, Gallup's deep target rate also dropped from a career average of 0.22 per target to 0.12. Now, a year further removed from the ACL injury, Gallup should be able to rediscover a lot of that downfield ability, and particularly with Brandon Cooks, who will play closer to the line of scrimmage. It really opens up those high-value targets for Gallup to get downfield, for Dak to take shots to him. And that's what the Cowboys wanted when they chose to extend Michael Gallup and move on from Amari Cooper in 2022. Don't be surprised at all if Gallup ends up scoring the second most fantasy points on this Cowboys offense behind CeeDee Lamb. Round 13, Gerald Everett. This was a historically good tight end class, but the Chargers didn't put anything into the position. They just opted to roll with Gerald Everett and Donald Parham again as their main tight end options. Parham's been an occasional red zone target, but offered next to zero consistency. While Everett flashed at times last year, 6 double-digit PPR performances on his way to a career-best tight end 13 ranking in points per game, Everett averaged 8.6 PPR points in 2022, and while that isn't spectacular, he only dipped below 7.8 on 4 occasions, which is a reasonable floor for a tight end. We've already talked about how the Chargers are set for a bounce-back season after Justin Herbert. He dealt with injuries last year that combined with tepid play call to see his average depth of target hit a career low 6.4 yards per attempt. And with Kellen Moore, he'll be calling the plays, and we should expect the Chargers to open things up much more. Quentin Johnston will open up more shots downfield, which in turn will mean that defenses can't put as much on the nearer line of scrimmage. Gerald Everett, he's great after the catch, real true great after the catch with the ball in his hands. He's tight end 1 in this offense, and we've seen enough from him and Justin Herbert to know that the two can be a good pair in fantasy football. And if Kellen Moore opts to feature a tight end much of the way that he did in Dallas, absolutely wheels up for Gerald Everett. Don't be surprised if he's a top 10 tight end. Round 14, Marvin Mims. Marvin Mims crept into the back end of round 2 when Sean Payton traded up to acquire him, and that was Sean Payton's first selection as head coach of the Broncos. Mims is exactly the type of undersized vertical threat that Sean Payton has loved to use throughout his career. And with the current state of Broncos wide receivers, Mims is going to see opportunities early. Tim Patrick suffered an Achilles injury. That means for the second consecutive year, he's going to miss the entire season. KJ Hamler's dealing with a heart condition and set to sideline him for at least a month. So when Mims gets on the field, don't be surprised if we see him as the deep threat. That was something which he did well in college, and we know Russ loves a moon ball every now and again. He could see some really high-value targets going his way, and this isn't necessarily a pick for early on in the season. But if you're playing best ball, absolutely Marvin Mims. And if you play in redraft and you have deep enough benches to draft and stash Mims, it could be really worthwhile. There's a huge upside to this one, particularly in case one of Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton gets moved before the trade deadline, something that we've been hearing about for months now. Round 15, Tyjae Spears. The Titans don't seem worried about Tyjae Spears' lack of an ACL, and perhaps we shouldn't be either. For whatever period of time Spears manages to play in the NFL, he could be the perfect player to take over from 29-year-old Derrick Henry. I mean, we're not talking about dynasty here. We're talking about redraft, and we're talking about best ball. And it seems very unlikely that Tyjae Spears' knee is going to blow up on him this year, and he's not going to be able to make it through the season. Betting against Derrick Henry, it's not paid off so well for a lot of people over the course of his career. But Father Time, it's always undefeated. Even Tom Brady succumbed to it eventually. Spears, he finished his college career with a final year of 1,600 yards and 19 rushing touchdowns. along with 250 receiving yards. Like, he's not a natural receiver, but he's not a nothing in that category either. Much more likely to be used on screens, check downs, and actually out there running routes like somebody like Bijan Robinson or Austin Eckler. Spears, though, he's a great runner and he can make people miss. He reads the blocks correctly and he can take what the offensive line's given him. The biggest mark against Spears might be this Titans offensive line might not be anywhere close to bad, could just be downright awful. But even so, if Derrick Henry gets traded by the trade deadline, which is a very real possibility for this Titans team if they end up going out and stinking early on, then Spears could see the kind of volume down the stretch that turns him into a league winner. So if you're playing redraft, stash him on your bench. If you're playing best ball, absolutely do not be afraid to take some shots on Tyjae Spears. That's all 15 rounds. This Fantasy Sanctuary. Loads more redraft content, loads of best ball, dynasty, DFS. We've got you covered here. Hit the like, hit the subscribe button. Let me know your perfect players for each round, which ones you disagree with. We are going to be back very soon.